Hey there, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Classic Gaming Brothers. I'm Seth.
And I'm Zach.
And we are the Classic Gaming Brothers.
Yeah, we are. I always say that.
that's-
Always I'm like, yeah.
You're always so excited for us to be talking about classic games in Brothers.
I like talking about, well, we do sometimes talk
about-
about brothers, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, here we are. Another episode. Zach, what have you been recently been playing?
Well, a game I've recently been playing is one that I picked up in the Steam Summer Sale, which, as of recording this episode, has ended a few days ago. It's a game that came out originally in 1997, and it is called Redneck Rampage.
Well, that sounds exciting.
I don't know why I picked it up, but it was on my wish list, and it was cheap. So Redneck Rampage is a first-person shooter from 1997, as I stated. It was developed by a company called Xatrix Entertainment, Xatrix, and it was published by Interplay. It is a game that uses the Build engine. And the Build engine, for anyone who doesn't know, is a first-person shooter engine created by a man named Ken Silverman, and he developed that for 3D Realms. And it's very similar to the Doom engine, but the Build engine is able to handle 3D spaces a little better than the Doom engine. So I think when we talked about Doom, we talked about the fact that Doom was not able to have stacked levels, essentially. So where if you go to a second floor, that second floor isn't like directly over the floor that you were previously on. I think we mentioned that. The Build engine effectively fixes that issue. It allows you to go it stacks things. So it kind of is able to fix some of those issues. It tends to be a smoother looking engine. So Redneck Rampage is built in that engine. You play as a kind of a stereotypical hillbilly character, and you have to fight off aliens and such. It takes place in like a fictional Midwest town, and you have a revolver and like a double-barreled shotgun, and you drink whiskey and you fight aliens. It's okay. I don't know if I was expecting anything amazing by the title. I do like first-person shooters of that time period, especially like games built in the Build engine, like Duke Nukem. So I think I was expecting something along the lines of Duke Nukem or Shadow Warrior. Kind of got not quite what I was looking for. But
I was just reading that it might be the port though to Steam. They said that they said you should buy it on GOG instead, as Good Old Games has a DOS box.
Maybe I'll pick up a copy on GOG next time GOG does a sale.
So if you're interested in picking up Redneck Rampage because you want to play a hillbilly in a Doom, Duke Nukem type situation, we recommend you grab it from the Good Old Games store versus the Steam store, as there may be issues with the Steam port of the game, not necessarily the game itself.
So Seth, what about you? What have you been playing?
So I have recently been playing a game called Turmoil. It is a lighter casual type game, where you're playing around the turn of the century of the 1900s, so 1899, give or take. And you play a kind of like it's like not necessarily a simulation game, but let me describe the game by describing it, how the gameplay is. So it's a very light, stylized game where you are given a plot of land in a set amount of time period to find oil in that land, and you need to sell that oil. So it has some pretty simplistic controls where you put a dowser down and they'll find the oil, and then you will place your oil rigs and you have to drill down somewhere beneath that oil rig where the dowser found oil. You will find oil. But
cool.
So you have to, and it costs money to drill the pipe, move the pipes down. And it's kind of like a cross section. So you have like the dirt, and then it takes up half the screen, and then like your little land that you're building, the oil rigs and stuff that you're built, the oil pumps that you're building are on the top part. And so the more you use more pipes to find the oil, the more money you spend. Once you find the oil, you have to pull it up and then use a horse and buggy to deliver it to either the company on the left or the company on the right. And the company on the left is called Left Incorporated, and the company on the right is called Right Incorporated.
Like Twix.
And they kind of, yeah. And you can also silo your oil.
Yeah.
So with that siloing of the oil, you can kind of play a price war. So company on the left may buy oil at a certain price. Company on the right will buy it at a different price. You can pick which one you're selling to, and then you can also just silo it. And it's kind of like a game of trying to because you're competing against 4 other like NPCs, and you're trying to maximize your profit from this short period of time. So you have like 6 months to drill out this area. And so you're trying to make the most profit out of the rest of them with kind of you selling the oil for the right price. You don't want to sell it too low, but you also don't want to, you need to sell it, because if you don't make any money at all, then you lose it. So you have to kind of set yourself standards. My strategy ended up being only selling above 80 cents per barrel. And then at the last like 2 weeks of the game, one of the companies like spikes to like $1 and change. So I just drove a lot of I had a bunch of extra. I even bought a wagon to just deliver more and more oil to it because I had so much extras. So it's fun, very light type of game, not too much like story or into it, but it's pretty interesting and a good kind of light. Not puzzle strategy type game, I guess. So here's that.
Cool.
With that, we're going to go into our episode here. This episode, we wanted to talk about a country culture and how it played and plays an important role into our gaming, video games, and all of that. So we know that we do have some people who live in Britain who listen to our show in the UK. And so this episode is kind of how the UK and Britain influenced video games. So while Zach and I were doing research for this episode, we actually didn't know that a lot of these developers had roots in England, and it was interesting, or the UK. It was interesting to discover that, as there was, and to find some of these companies' roots that have kind of, at least for me, have always been what they are. So let's go through the history of it first, and then we'll also talk about kind of the different type of. We'll take a segue as we go through the history to talk about the different types of systems that they had over there. The popularity of gaming and video gaming in Britain and the United Kingdom can stem back to 1975, where Ian Livingstone and Steve Jackson, now that's British Steve Jackson, not American Steve Jackson, formed a company called Games Workshop. The distinction between the Steve Jackson is American Steve Jackson is known for Steve Jackson Games, where they make games like Illuminati or the GURPS, the General Universal Role-Playing System.
Right.
Or the generic Universal Role-Playing System. And he also made a video game called Ogre. British Steve Jackson, who is commonly mistaken for American Steve Jackson, worked with Ian Livingstone to make Games Workshop, and also he worked as a developer down the road in the 90s for Lionhead Studios with Peter Molyneux, who we'll talk about later as well. He also worked on some fighting fantasy games and a game called Sorcery! ! So Games Workshop, which is the company that brings you Warhammer and Warhammer 40K, really brought gaming to Britain. And they use their platform to market game news and inform the British populace about things like Dungeons and Dragons. And they did this through a newsletter that was called The Owl and Weasel. And over time, in like 1977, they formalized it into an actual game magazine called White Dwarf. Eventually, in 1991, they sold off Games Workshop for £10 million. So Games Workshop is very evidently very important to not only gaming in general, but you have the Warhammer Fantasy, have Warhammer Fantasy, Warhammer 40K, and all of the Warhammer. There's hundreds of books written about Warhammer stuff. Warhammer itself is its own whole fandom and has video games, books. So that all came from this company. White Dwarf was a very important magazine and was able to really bring different type of gaming news in a format that people could read. Since it was the 70s, the internet wasn't the way it was today. It was a vastly different world. So in order to find out about these type of subcultures, you had to read these type of magazines. Interestingly enough, Ian Livingstone, he would go off to work for a game called Domark, which was then bought by Eidos Interactive, which was then bought by a company called SCI, where Ian Livingstone was invested in a board member and was retained by all these companies through the purchases. And when the company was bought by SCI, he was put in charge of acquisitions. And Ian Livingstone, the founder of Games Workshop, went to go and acquired Tomb Raider and Hitman for the Eidos company, which they still have rights to today, and they still make Hitman and Tomb Raider games.
Yeah.
In 2009, Square Enix actually bought out Eidos, and Livingstone was kept on until he retired in 2013 at the age of 64. So this man dedicated from 1975 to 2013 his life to gaming. He did, when they sold in 1991, he did take a break for about 2 years where he got bored from being retired from selling his company, and that's when he started working for Domark that's when he invested into Domark. Do you want to talk a little bit about what happened in 1983?
Yeah, so in 1983, a kind of quirky little game came out called Manic Miner. So Manic Miner was a little bedroom creation, as our notes put it, a little bedroom creation of a 17-year-old Matthew Smith, not to be confused with British actor Matt Smith, who was loaned a computer called the ZX Spectrum. So Matthew created this game in like 8 weeks or so, got it released, and it became this massive kind of success in early computing games for England. So I think one thing that I want to talk about before we talk more about Manic Miner and more of these computer games that come out is the fact that England kind of had a different little history when it came to the systems and stuff that were out over there. So while they did have, the Nintendos and the Segas and all the stuff that we have, England also saw a much stronger presence in the home computer market. So primarily British companies such as Sinclair Research, Amstrad, Tangerine, there's another one called Dragon, and also British government's own BBC, British Broadcasting Community, all had 8-bit computers that were out for the personal market. One of the most popular ones was from Sinclair Research. It was called the ZX Spectrum, and or as the British people might want to call it, the ZX Spectrum, as the people in Europe say Z differently than we do. And the ZX Spectrum was popular for a couple of reasons. One, it was inexpensive. It was only about 125 pounds at the time, which was British pounds, which was incredibly cheap compared to other home computers that were available for the market. Another thing was that the games for it were primarily distributed via cassettes. What that meant was, unlike computers such as the Commodore 64, which was also popular, or some of the other computers that were out, you didn't need to buy a whole separate floppy disk drive just to play your games. You could actually just use any old cassette drive, a couple of cables connected up to your computer, and you could run any game via the cassette drive. So this kind of saw popularity with the home computer market because of the convenience. So the ZX Spectrum became very popular with people in England. There were competitors, of course. Companies such as Amstrad released something called the Amstrad CPC, which was a similar system. It was actually built on the exact same microprocessor. It just ran things a bit differently. It was a little more expensive. It had a built-in cassette deck, which was, saw as pretty nice, nice little perk. And also they saw competition from America's Commodore. Commodore was releasing the 64 and the VIC-20 over in the European market, which people saw as competition because they were stronger computers, the Commodore. So the popularity of home computers at the time also saw a growth in computer magazines, in magazines that were dedicated to these home computer games. There were magazines that were dedicated to just ZX Spectrum games. There were magazines dedicated to just Amstrad games, magazines dedicated to just Commodore games. And a lot of these magazines were cool because one thing is every few months or so, they often would bundle kind of a collection of games on cassette with your subscription. So you'd get a magazine, and taped on the front would be a cassette tape that you could play on your computer, play whole brand new games, and that was called a cover tape. Also cool was that some of the pages were actually dedicated to lines of code that you could input by hand to play games that were being submitted by people like you, by people that enjoyed playing video games, and by people often young, which is where we have Matthew Smith come in. Matthew Smith being a 17-year-old who kind of played around with things like the Spectrum and decided that he was going to create this game called Manic Miner, which was a kind of irreverent game that appealed to British sense of humor. You play as a guy named Willie, and Willie is a miner, and he travels through caverns to collect flashing objects, avoiding poisonous pansies and other deadly traps. It really kind of was pushing this early 8-bit computer's capabilities to its limits. Manic Miner had really imaginative music, it had really colorful graphics, it had a kind of animated title screen, which was unique for the time. It really was a really kind of astounding game to come out from such a young person. And Manic Miner also did see a sequel. It saw a couple of sequels, one called Jet Set Willie, and there was also Jet Set Willie 2, both of which continue to follow the adventures of Willie.
Yes, one of the fun things is that Manic Miner was made in 8 weeks.
Yes.
Using a Model 3 Tandy, and it was the first ZX Spectrum title that had in-game music.
Yeah.
And then Jet Set Willie was also... it took considerably longer to write, but they were both commercial successes especially in the UK. So that leads us to 1984. There is another game that gets developed called Elite. It is a 3D space adventure. By 1984, computer sales in the British homes were the highest in the world. 2 Cambridge students created Elite. Those 2 Cambridge students were by the name of David Braden and Ian Bell. They did so by experimenting on what's known as the BBC Micro, and they created a space trading game in their spare times just before finals while they're at Cambridge. Cambridge is a pretty lofty school.
Yeah.
Cambridge and Oxford. So I'm sure they're both of those schools there. Whoever goes to those schools are pretty brilliant people. And in this Elite game, players would journey across galaxies. You defend and upgrade your ship. You would. There was a very open-ended gameplay, and because of that open-ended gameplay, it really rewrote kind of how video games were supposed to be played. Most video games before kind of were very linear, had stories. This was really kind of you had these 3D image outlines and just kind of like you could do whatever you want in the game. So it was also the first non-American game to become an American bestseller. So Elite did very well in the US and globally. It allowed the game to have a number of sequels. They had 3 official sequels. Frontier Elite 2 came out in 93. Frontier First Encounters Elite 3 came out in 95. And the third sequel is Elite Dangerous. Elite Dangerous was conceived in 98. Provisionally titled Elite 4. Was crowdfunded through Kickstarter in the 2012 and was finally released in 2014. So this was all being shepherded by David Braden, who worked on the original game, as he is now the CEO of Frontier Developments. Frontier Developments also made Planet Coaster, Planet Zoo, and also did the Roller Coaster Tycoon 3. They're decidedly a large video game developer, and I think it's kind of cool that like probably one of the first games that David and Ian developed together in '84 has kind of been shepherded throughout the generations and gets upgraded and just adjusted. And now, it's Elite Dangerous, which I think is an even more household name than perhaps Elite, though I'm sure Elite for the people buying it in the 80s where it was a common household name then too.
Oh yeah.
So it's kind of cool that way.
So in 1989, British video games pioneer Peter Molyneux, whose name we'll probably use later in this and also in later episodes of this podcast, decided that he wanted to make something that was intellectually challenging. He felt that games needed to be they needed to kind of challenge the players in different ways. So he created this game called Populous, and Populous is the first ever God game. And what I mean by God game is that players took on the power and responsibility of a deity. You made moral choices to shape landscapes, inflicted disasters, you gained followers, and it was widely successful. Populous sold over 4 million copies and created a genre that would still be done to this day. I mean, most notably, I think, is The Sims, which kind of plays along the same idea of playing God. And this idea of kind of playing God is something in video games is something that Peter Molyneux definitely didn't stray away from. Some of his later games kind of follow a very similar mechanic.
So Peter Molyneux was with Bullfrog, which developed Populous and published by EA. Eventually, EA bought Bullfrog. He eventually left EA to go work at Lionhead Studios, where he made another God game. And then Lionhead Studios was eventually bought by Microsoft. And then he has now left to go work at 22 Can, with which the Tim Rance, who's the CTO of Lionhead Studios, started, where he created another God game.
Like I said, they definitely followed him through his career.
Fable and Black and White were both done under the Lionhead masthead. And fun fact, they also made the Movies game, which was amazing. The Movies game, and they had an expansion. It was called Stunts and Special Effects. Was an awesome management game where you ran a movie studio and you had to film your own movies, and you actually got to film your own movies. So you not only managed the operations of your movie studio with hiring and firing actors and actresses, but you also got to film the movies and cut them in editing, and you could do it yourself. So you could actually make your own movie. And if you YouTube movies from the Movies games, you could see some of the movies that people have made, and they're great. Highly recommend it if you like sim type strategy games. And like Zachary said, Peter Molyneux, David Braden, Ian Livingstone, Steve Jackson, these guys are staple British game developers, and we'll definitely bring these guys up again in future episodes as well. This brings us to 1991 in Dundee. A group of friends from a computer club would start a game called DMA Designs and created a game called Lemmings. And Lemmings, you direct a group of green-haired creatures through obstacles at increasing levels of difficulty. And was originally released for the Amiga computer because it had split screen capability and dual mouse inputs, so you can do 2 players. And on its first day, it sold 55,000 copies.
Wow.
Eventually, the other versions were released, and they made multiple Lemmings games. And this DMA Designs company will come up very soon. But Zach, why don't you tell us about a game that I always thought was actually American, but it's not.
I thought this game was American too, and then I realized the developer is, of course, a British company, so it makes sense. But in 1997, we saw a game that would define first-person shooters and would change video games almost from the core, and that is GoldenEye, 007 GoldenEye for the Nintendo 64. So GoldenEye was created by a company called Rare, and Rare was actually founded by 2 brothers, Tim and Chris Stamper, who really founded the company out in a farmhouse in rural Leicestershire. I can't say long British town names. in a small British town. We're gonna get corrected by someone I know. But Rare started back, in the 1980s. They created a lot of games for the ZX Spectrum, and later they were involved with partnerships with Nintendo, including creating ports of games like I believe they did the port of Double Dragon for the Nintendo Entertainment System. In any case, they eventually got the license to create the video game based on the James Bond film GoldenEye, and they did it. It took over 2 years to create, and it created it really pioneered a more realistic style of first-person shooters that really wasn't seen yet. I mean, first-person shooters at that time in the 90s were like Doom and Quake. I mean, there were these bombastic, explosive games, and GoldenEye really toned it down. I mean, your enemies weren't demons or monsters; they were Russians, and you weren't blowing stuff up, to get through the pits of hell. You were using stealth to sneak around these military bases and Russian, Russian military structures and such. It also had really fantastic multiplayer. It was a 4-player multiplayer split screen that, frankly, I had great times playing it when I remember playing the game, even if Seth always did love playing his Odd Job and did not like auto aim to be turned on so he could sneak around that map. It actually won the first ever BAFTA, which is the British Academy Film and Television Arts for Interactive Entertainment. It was the first ever video game BAFTA. It was awarded the BAFTA as kind of recognition of the increasing importance of video games in the entertainment industry. It also grossed over $250 million, which is remarkable. A really cool fact about GoldenEye that I think shows Rare's history, it shows their love of British gaming, is the fact that there's an entire ZX Spectrum emulator hidden within its code, and 5 games that are hidden in the code. They're almost completely unable to be accessed via standard means. You actually have to use extensive hacking to get into the code. To find the emulator, and it actually wasn't even found until about 2014 was when someone stumbled across it, and they talked to one of the Rare developers, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we put that in there." So that's kind of a fun little fact about it.
That is fun. Which brings us to it's still 1997, the end of 1997. That Dundee studio, DMA Design, was influenced by some earlier games like Elite, where it was an open world action type of thing. So they created an open world action adventure game, except you took the role of a criminal and you roamed around freely around multiple cities. You could go wherever you want, do whatever you want, and just have fun. It was 2D, top down, there was graphics, and they were considered somewhat limited, but it was definitely praised for its fun and the ability, just like its freshness. And that game was Grand Theft Auto. The Dundee studio, DMA Design, changed its name to Rockstar, and they eventually, so Rockstar is now a very, very large company. The DMA Design, which became Rockstar, eventually kind of became Rockstar North, which is based in Edinburgh. And they still develop every Grand Theft Auto game. They also they supported Red Dead Redemption, and they worked on Manhunt, and they've got their, as kind of the original Rockstar, they kind of have their fingers in a lot of what Rockstar's projects are. But they worked on they developed every Grand Theft Auto to Grand Theft Auto 5, which is out right now and is a very popular game. So I think that's cool, since I didn't even know that Rockstar did Lemmings, but was this studio that it's kind of cool and interesting to see a studio, to see the roots of people meeting in a computer club, getting together and being like, we could make a game about lemmings, to making a game about criminals, to making Grand Theft Auto, one of the biggest franchises around. And so, I mean, eventually, in 1998, Take-Two Interactive, one of the reasons why they're a New York-based type situation is Take-Two Interactive bought them and they become a subsidiary. So there was a lot of kind of moving around where became it's kind of less so. It's kind of now a blended international company.
Yes, right, yeah.
but primarily the most of the work that is done is still done by the Rockstar North. Though there is multiple Rockstars. There is Rockstar India. There is Rockstar International. There is Rockstar Leeds, which did Grand Theft Auto Chinatown Wars, Liberty City Stories, Vice City Stories, and took care of LA Noire to Microsoft Windows port. There's Rockstar Lincoln, primarily dedicated around quality assurance and localization. Rockstar London did Manhunt 2 and Midnight Club LA Remix.
Oh.
Rockstar New England, which is based in Andover, Massachusetts, responsible for Bully Scholarship Edition.
Oh, cool. Bully's a good game.
Rockstar North, the Edinburgh, kind of the grandpappy of them all, does Manhunt and Grand Theft Auto. Rockstar San Diego is the one responsible for Red Dead, Smuggler's Run, and the Midnight Club series. And Rockstar Toronto, which did The Warriors and window ports. There was also Rockstar Vancouver and Rockstar Vienna, but both of those were closed. So Rockstar does have a lot of subsidiaries. Rockstar North does most of the work. Well, the most successful of the work. Sorry, not the most of the work. Most successful work.
The noticeable work.
Right. Next to San Diego doing Red Dead now. Yeah, so we'll probably do an episode on Rockstar in the future.
Yeah,
I think Rockstar is
interesting company. I mean, they
very interesting company.
They have some really great games. They have some controversy involved with them. I think they're very fascinating, topic.
Right. Then they have some games that are also not great.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. They have plenty of those.
So they have some really great games, some games that are just not. So with that, I think that's what we got for our British invasion episode, as it were.
Yeah, at least for this episode, I think.
I hope that you learned something about British influencing to our video gaming culture.
Yeah, and there's definitely more games that we can talk about in future episodes. So if you are interested in more British video games, or maybe perchance you are a British individual who wants us to talk about a certain game or a certain series, there's plenty of stuff that we didn't have a chance to touch upon. So let us know. And we will certainly give it some research and we'll try to do something.
Right. So, and we'll also in future episodes pick on other countries as well to talk about their influence to us.
I like the way you worded that. We'll pick on the country.
We'll pick on them. Yeah. They don't want us talking about them. It is to note that beyond the United States and Japan, Britain is the third largest video game developer, or at least was at one point in time. So with that, let's get into our buy, wait, pass.
Let's get into it.
Zach, what are you excited about buying, waiting, or passing on?
Well, Seth, the game that the game that's in my buy, wait, pass in my eyesight right now is called The Forgotten City. So The Forgotten City is a game coming out in potentially winter 2020. That's what they have listed on their Steam page. It's being developed by Modern Storyteller and published by Dear Villagers. And I'm fairly certain, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, because I think you know a bit about Forgotten City. I'm fairly certain it's a really extensive Skyrim mod. And
it is. It's a
total conversion.
It's a
right?
Total conversion mod. Yeah.
So
there's some other another total conversion mod that's out there as well. Actually, I think there's a
few. I think
so. There's a few total conversion mods out there. There was one that I was playing recently.
Oh, there's that weird one.
Yeah, what was it called?
I don't remember.
Oh, Enderal. Forgotten Stories.
Yeah. So, The Forgotten City is it's actually kind of different from other total conversion mods that I've seen. So, total conversion mods, for those who don't know, are full modifications of an existing game. And by total conversion, it usually is implying that it completely changes the game to the point where it is almost its own original thing. So The Forgotten City is actually based in ancient Rome. It takes place 2,000 years in the past during the final days of a cursed Roman city where if one person sins, everybody dies. Each secret uncovered and decision made could save the 26 lost souls caught in the cursed cycle or doom them forever, and it asks you if you can break the time loop. So already this is combining some stuff that I think is really interesting. I love games that kind of have a historical or a fictionalized historical setting. I also really like time loop stories. Like Groundhog Day is one of my favorite movies. So it's a game that I'm definitely going to keep an eye out for. It doesn't have any price tag listed. Knowing it's a total conversion, I'm assuming it's probably going to be free. A lot of total conversions are due to licensing and such. So it's definitely going to be a most likely a buy or a wait for me. I'm going to keep an eye out for it for sure. It definitely interests me. What about you, Seth?
The game that I'm excited about buying, waiting, or passing on is a game called Automatica. It's a tactical puzzle game where you need to program your robots to finish the task.
Oh, that's interesting. Seth, can you tell me who made it?
It's being developed by Automatica.
I think you had it right the first time. Automatica?
Probably. Automatica, yeah. I was trying to say it differently. Automatica Corp. And being published by Cinemax. I was actually mentioning to Zach, I've never developed a game myself. I just having the game have the same name as your developer. I just think it puts you down to where that's the only thing you can do.
Yeah, right. Like, what are your other games going to be called?
I have no room to question because I've never done it myself. So the game was it was actually a hobby project, which is probably why the developer is named that way. Who designed by Victor Bocan, who worked over at Warhorse Studios, who did Kingdom Come Deliverance, which is a very extensive, realistic medieval simulator, and it is now in the development by a small indie company under the direction of Lucas Markura, who is also the CEO of Cinemax Prague, the publisher.
Oh.
So they must have made the company as like a subsidiary or something.
Yeah, right.
You cannot enter any of the ships and you cannot control your robots directly. So you have to program your robots. And it's not a game where you need to learn programming. If you can run a game on Steam, you can program these robots. But it is a strategy game where you are looking to get these robots to accomplish the task for you. I think it's interesting. I'm going to wishlist it and put it down as a wait. I think the game probably fits in my type of games that I like to play. I'm looking at it. It does have like code in it where then you have like keys to put the code in, but it looks like the keys that you'll enter will kind of write the code for you.
Yeah, that's cool.
And I think you just have to kind of learn how to read the code kind of thing. And I think that's the kind of the the gimmick to the game, I guess. Cool. It looks fun. It looks cool. It should be coming out early access in the summer, which is now. So hopefully it'll be out soon.
Yeah.
But that's it. So it's put on a wait.
Awesome. Well, hey, Seth, do you wanna give us a rundown on ways to contact,
Sure.
ways to listen, ways to do anything really?
Ways to support.
Yeah, all those stuff.
So there's a couple of ways to contact us, listen to us, and support us. To contact us, you can send us an email at classicgamingbrothers.com. You can also go to our website, go to the feedback form, fill out a feedback form, and send us the email, Classic Gaming Brothers. That goes to our email as well. Our website is, of course, classicgamingbrothers.com. So once you send that email, we will respond to you. We do have a pretty quick turnaround time. We love hearing feedback. There may be a couple of contests that we can enter you into them, whether you want to be entered them into them or not. No, they're always voluntary. But Zachary may be able to mail you cassette tapes. We could also give you a free game. So just send us feedback. You can support us by ringing all the bells and liking all the posts, sharing whenever an episode drops. That's always fun. I appreciate the shares. You can also follow us or like us on Instagram. Our Facebook is Classic Gaming Brothers. Our Instagram is Classic Gaming Brothers. We also have a Twitter, which you can follow us there, and that's CG Brothers Pod. We announce all of our episodes on Facebook and Twitter. You can also support us by, if you want, you can buy merch. You can also watch us on Twitch. Our Twitch is Twitch TV/Classic Gaming Brothers, and Zachary's View is /VS Classic Gaming Brothers. We go live occasionally.
Yeah, we have no schedule.
We have no schedule. We're not Twitch people.
No,
we're podcasters. But I guess we're more video gamers, but yeah,
we're just guys being dudes.
We're just two brothers making a podcast. But so we Twitch when we can or when we want, and we play fun and weird games.
Yeah.
You can listen to us where any podcasts are heard: Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, what have you. And so there's that.
Perfect.
So Zach, is there anything else that you'd like to say?
I don't know. I think it's don't play games like my brother.
And don't play games like my brother.
I've been Zach.
And I've been Seth.
And we've been the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right.
That's right. I don't got anything funny for British games.
Apparently the stomping was my cat fetching and playing with himself, running up and down the stairs.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
Yeah. He's pretty.
He's a good cat.
Yeah.
We should interview him on the podcast.
Yeah. Well, he's smashing around right now. He apparently wants to play with his brain.